I will tell you, I have been waiting for this day for months now, looking forward to it, counting the days where I could introduce you to a good friend of mine, Byron Johnson, and where there's going to be an announcement a little bit later. Byron is someone who, for those of you in this world of the intersection of faith and academia, already know Byron, but I don't want to take the entire time that it would take for his presentation to really introduce all of the things that he is and does. Let me just start with his current position. He is the director of Baylor's Institute for the Studies of Religion, and he's a distinguished professor of sociology at Baylor University. Prior to coming to Baylor, Byron had led research institutes at both Vanderbilt and the University of Pennsylvania. About a little bit less than 2 decades ago, Baylor enticed him to come down and lend his talents to this very new center that he formed that really brings together scholars from all over the world to study the impact of Christian faith on human flourishing, on the common good, on society at large. Byron is the author of more than 200 journal articles, monographs, and books. 5 recent books are called More God, Less Crime, The Angola Prison Seminary. I highly encourage you to read this one. All of them, but this one in particular. The Quest for Purpose, The Restorative Prison, and Objective Religion. My path crossed Byron's about 6 years ago when I was introduced to him while I was out at Baylor University meeting with some folks and doing a little bit of speaking. And I will tell you that from the moment we met, I knew that we were kindred spirits and really cared about the same things. A deep and abiding faith in God and a desire to follow his son, Jesus Christ. And to do so in an academic university environment that taught students but also illuminated the scholarly enterprise with the impact of faith. Our paths intersected a year or so later when I was at the Angola prison in Louisiana. I was there with 5 Ugandan prison officials studying the incredible work that was being done at that prison, much of which you're going to be hearing about in Byron's talk. But I remember seeing the New Orleans Theological Seminary, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary sign, and thinking, that's the work that Byron was studying. The impact of Christian faith on prison populations, both inside the prison and after they left. And then our paths crossed again in Italy. We were there for a religious liberty conference together. And then here, shortly after I was named, we held that same religious liberty conference at Pepperdine, and our paths crossed again. And then about a year ago, we started dreaming together of how we could work together to advance the kingdom, to advance the knowledge of the impact of faith on people's lives. Then about 6 months ago, the process began of trying to think through what this might look like. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what that's going to end up looking like yet. That's a job for Jay Brewster after Byron talks about 2 really important particular projects he's worked on or is working on in a larger realm of studies that he's done on the impact of Christian faith on the world. But what I also want to tell you is you can see his work firsthand if you go to the Museum of the Bible. If you go to the 2nd floor of the Museum of the Bible, the impact of the Bible in America, that was directed, designed, curated by Byron Johnson. And so you're going to hear a little bit about a lot. There's a whole lot more if you want to read about. And then Jay will have an announcement, and then Byron, Jay, and I will have a conversation about next steps here at Pepperdine. And we'll invite you into that conversation as well. So please join me in welcoming Byron Johnson to the podium.
Thank you. What a treat to be here. I have been looking forward to this for many months as well, and I have an affinity for Pepperdine University and all that you stand for And it is just a pleasure to be here and can't wait to interact with you and share a few thoughts tonight. I wanted to start by, before I get to the first slide, telling you a story of my dissertation. I don't talk about it very often, but I wanted to study the impact of faith, and I was looking at prison populations, which is a place that Jim and I gravitate to all the time, and I couldn't find data. And then I heard about a chaplain that had been collecting data for many, many years. No one had asked him to do it. He had just been keeping meticulous notes, at attendance, at functions, and he actually kept notes on any inmate that had a religious conversion. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. So I went to the prison, I visited the chaplain, I said, can I see your records? And they were really detailed. So I looked at the records and thought I could do a dissertation on this topic, and I studied prisoners over a 10-year period, post-release. And we were able to do a design where we could compare the prisoners to see what we would find. And unfortunately for me, I found that those who claimed to have a born-again experience were just as likely to be rearrested as anybody in the prison. And so I can tell you that research was published so quickly, because in the academic community, that was music to ears of reviewers. But it got me thinking, why wouldn't conversion be an important variable? And so that became a quest that I'm still on to this very day. And most of the publications that we have done since then have come out with findings that are quite different. Because as you might expect, a conversion experience in and of itself really doesn't change too many things if you look at it in maybe not an eternal way, but you look at it in other kinds of ways, the roles of mentors, etc. So let me begin. This first slide is a picture of someone that you may or may not recognize. Some of the older people in the room might. This is Chuck Colson in prison, federal prison, immediately after the Watergate scandal. For some of you may remember him, the Hatchet Man. He was convicted of obstruction of justice, went to prison, had a conversion experience, but this wasn't your typical jailhouse religion. Chuck would devote the rest of his life to helping prisoners in the United States and around the world, and he formed something called Prison Fellowship. And after I did the dissertation, shockingly, Prison Fellowship reached out to me. You might think, why would they do that? He found that religion was not important. But they did, and I did a study for Prison Fellowship, and it's the first one that you see there that came out in 1997. They have different programs at Prison Fellowship, but the one that was most impactful was volunteer-led Bible studies. And we studied multiple prisons in New York, and then we followed prisoners after they got out of prison. And the simple intervention of weekly Bible studies, comparing inmates that participated and inmates that did not participate, was a huge factor. So 14% versus 41% in terms of likelihood of rearrest post-release. And of course, then the question becomes, okay, that was just 1 year post-release. What if you do a follow-up over a longer period of time? Because as you know, people can get arrested subsequently. And so we did. The second study you see there, these are all top journals. We found that the effect continued for 2 to 3 years post-release, which is if you can make it 3 years, you have a good chance of making it. So that really helped Prison Fellowship think long and hard about their interventions. If a simple Bible study would be helpful, what more could we do? So then Prison Fellowship came up with this kind of crazy idea. What if we had a faith-based prison where they got religious programming 24 hours a day? And believe it or not, that's what the promotional materials said. And I remember telling them that would be unconstitutional. That would be cruel and unusual punishment to do programming like that. But they did come up with this idea of a faith-based prison that would have all kinds of other programs attached to it, but it would be infused with Christian principles and study of Scripture. They approached 11 governors in the U.S., and they all said, we're not interested in such a thing, until they came to Texas. And Texas had a young governor, George W. Bush, that said, I would love for you to come here. Where have you been all my life? So Chuck, had a sit-down meeting with then Governor Bush, and they inked a deal in 1996, and the prison, the Carroll Vance unit, some of you may be familiar with it, it's right outside of Houston, was where the prison was located, and they decided what we'll do is we'll cut the prison in half, theoretically, and half the prison will be faith-based, and half will be general population. And I was hired to do the evaluation, the impact evaluation of what they call the Interchange Freedom Initiative. And it was a 6-year study, and so for those of you that aren't very patient, some of these things take a while because you have to study the whole program, and then you have to study them after they get out of the program to see if it has a lasting effect. And the results, there's many, many results I could give you, but this is the one that everyone wants to know. Did it affect recidivism? And the answer is yes, it really did affect recidivism. And there you can see that if you go through the program and complete the program, you're less than, about half as likely to be rearrested as well as reincarcerated. So that was the finding from the Interchange Freedom Initiative, and once that came out, what would you expect? But other states were interested as well. They started calling, can we do this? But I will say about the Texas experiment, it was Chuck's idea to keep the two sides of the prison separate because he didn't want the general population to contaminate the good work going on in the faith-based side. But what happened after like a month, inmates were secretly going from the faith-based side into the general population, and we're doing Bible studies with them and baptizing inmates. I don't know how you do that covertly, but that's what happened. And so eventually the whole prison became a faith-based prison. Well, then, after that, we did a study in Iowa of the Interchange Freedom Initiative, and that's the one on the bottom there that you see. The results, even more compelling than what we found in Texas, and this is what the results look like. And if we had more inmates that went through a bigger time period, and you can see that the likelihood of arrest or reconviction or reincarceration dramatically down in this study. And then we thought, what if we did some kind of a cost-benefit analysis? It's one thing to say you reduce recidivism, but what does that mean in terms that people might actually understand? And so there, if you look at that, each participant saved the state of Minnesota about $8,300 as a result of not being reincarcerated and being gainfully employed and paying taxes. The other study I was going to mention, the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. Some of you may have heard about this. This may be the most innovative study or program that I know of. This is where business executives go into prison and take inmates and help them develop a business plan so they can start their own businesses. As you can imagine, the most difficult thing for prisoners is to find employment. For a lot of them, just getting a driver's license is difficult. So transportation, housing, because they're convicted felons, it's something that kind of haunts them. In this particular case, they help them start their own businesses. I mean, this is kind of a complete paradigm shift. And then when they get a business plan ready, those business plans are scored by college students in business schools all across the country. So a number of the Ivy League schools participate in the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. And as you might expect, it's an incredible return on investment because it's all privately paid for. Almost all of them have remained crime-free since going through the program. And of course, a lot of them have thriving businesses. This is just a few studies. I'm not going to talk about these, but the one thing that we consistently find is that faith is a protective factor. You're much less likely to abuse alcohol and drugs if you are a person of faith in the first place. So there's this huge protective factor that we find in study after study after study, but it's not just that. It's the other side of the equation. It helps people do the right kind of things, make the right kind of decisions. It's what we call the pro-social side. Why are people generous? Why do people help other people? Why do they serve other people? These are acts of kindness that some people will call. We call them pro-social behavior. So religion is both protective and it's also pro-social. Two powerful things. And then these are just a series of studies. I'm sorry for the squinting there that you would need to see that, but we've had a lot of fun just producing study after study on these things. And so when I was in graduate school back in the Paleolithic era, there were next to no studies on these topics. And now there are not just hundreds, but there are thousands of studies. And we've had a good hand in producing a number of them. This particular book in 2011 summarized a bunch of that research. I'm really proud of it because one of your own, James Q. Wilson, reviewed this book in the Wall Street Journal, which he did me a big favor by doing that because it's James Q. Wilson. And so I thought I'd mention that. Now, the Angola story that Jim mentioned, for those of you that don't know about this, this is the Louisiana State Penitentiary located in Angola. Angola is an 18,000-acre former plantation farm. The slaves that were brought from Angola, Africa, came here. This is located in a remote area. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. Kind of swamp-infested. Again, 18,000 acres. It looks rather scenic there, but it's really a place that has a horrible track record, kind of known as the most punitive, most corrupt prison in America, incredibly violent. 6,300 inmates, the largest maximum security prison in America. And in 1995, a warden went there and said, how am I going to run this place? They don't give you enough money to run it, so you have to be creative. That's why they have a farm. But he said, if I'm going to survive here, I need a new idea. And that idea was to start a Bible college in the prison. And as Jim said, they pitched this idea to the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. They said, we like the idea. Let us think on it. They decided to do it. They launched the seminary in 1995. Most wardens, by the way, move around about every 2 years. But Burl Cain would stay there for 20 years. That, too, is unprecedented in correctional history. And it really did turn the prison around. And in 2012, Burl Cain, the warden, called me. He said, look, I need some help here. I'm not getting the respect that we're due. Why don't people think what we're doing is making a difference? We've reduced suicides to almost zero. Violence is down. Inmates are getting an education. And I said, well, really, you have all these great anecdotes, but as we say, the plural of anecdote is not data. We actually need to come in here and do a study that would take some time and follow people over time to make the case that I think you want us to make. And he goes, well, how long would something like that take? And I said, years. And so we did. We got a study funded for 5 years, a team of 5 researchers. We went and basically camped out there for weeks and weeks at a time. And my wife is here somewhere in the room. I remember I injured my shoulder on one of the first visits, and the doctor said I couldn't lift a suitcase for a few weeks, so she had to go with me, and she had the pleasure of sleeping in a maximum security prison, which is, I've taken her to some wonderful places over the years, some of the best prisons in this country. So this is the seminary. You're seeing a class in session. This is another class in section. And, we would go to classes. We would listen to the classes. I know some people think, yeah, it's inmates. What's going on here? Some of the most incredible, deep theological discussions taking place in these classes. By the way, these guys, almost all of them are serving life without parole. So they're all going to die there. which is an intriguing thing because so many people think skeptically they're in this for some other motive. What's the motive? It certainly isn't going to get you an early release. It's Louisiana. There was one guy, I think, that was serving 10 consecutive life sentences. I mean, it's not necessary. One would have done it, but and to run consecutively. So this is the library in the seminary. But the one thing that we weren't told, we went there basically to do a study of the seminary. Can the seminary change that whole ugly prison? When we got there, we found out that there were ministers in the prison. This is an inmate minister who is a pastor of a church, and you see he's here preaching. They have entire churches there. And we thought, well, this is fascinating. So we started going to churches in the prison, and as you might expect, or might not expect, even though it's maximum security, if your families are willing to travel there, your families can worship in the church with you. And a number of the correctional employees attend the church, or a church is, more than one church. And so they're being ministered to by a prisoner serving life. And there used to be a day and age when people from the outside would come in and preach, like Franklin Graham and others, by the way. The Graham family has strong ties to Angola, but now they don't really allow that anymore, because the outsiders cannot preach anywhere nearly as effective as the inmates can preach. Seriously. So we started looking at this. This is another guy serving life, a pastor. And that ID card, you're wondering, why are you showing us that? This ID card allows this person to go anywhere in the prison to minister to inmates. So they have sidewalk counseling, grief counseling, death row counseling, because anyone in Louisiana that's put to death, it happens at Angola. Most of their family members, they die. They can't go to the funeral. So these ministers are able to go anywhere, and if the correctional officers try to prevent that, they themselves are in deep trouble. So to have this is a special thing. This is a cemetery. About 3 men a month die, and the inmates, of course, do the funerals. They build the coffins, and I don't know if you heard about this or not. Billy Graham and his wife Ruth were both buried in a coffin made in Angola. The coffins used to, as of a couple of years ago, cost $217 to build out of pine. They used the lining, a comforter lining from Walmart, to make the coffins. And we wrote a piece on this, and people all over the place, I want to be buried in a coffin made in Angola. And it's kind of like, no, the Grahams, that's it. The person that sang for Billy Graham for so many years, this is George Beverly Shea, also got one, okay? But those are the only ones. This is a hospice unit. I know Jim has been there, where you have inmates that are dying. Oprah Winfrey did a special where she went there, and you see inmates ministering to inmates. This is a vocational class where they're being taught. You can have 32 different kinds of vocational certifications. I don't know of any prison in America that offers something quite like this. So it's so cutting edge in one of the most backward places in the world. This is one of the churches. This is another church. So when I say churches, I mean standalone buildings, privately paid for. This is the latest. It's a Catholic church. This is just one of their plaques. These are inmate ministers that have gone to other prisons in Louisiana. They've been transferred, and so now they're trying to, well, you can see it, they're missionaries. But most of the guys will stay there at Angola. Except for these guys. These guys are all serving life, except for one of them there. And when Burl Cain left Louisiana, Mississippi hired him recently to be commissioner, which is really unusual considering he's about 80. And these guys are all hired by the Department of Corrections as chaplains. They had to get the laws changed, Jim, to make this possible because they're convicted felons. It's just kind of a remarkable story, really. This is the book that Jim mentioned on Angola. It's the largest study ever done in a prison that looks at religion. This one, I won't talk long, but this is a new study that we've done for the American Bible Society on their trauma healing program. And some of you may know this. For many years, the American Bible Society has had this program, but it's been all around the world dealing with catastrophe, genocide. How do you go into places where the gospel's never been before and introduce people to the Bible? You do it through storytelling. And so they've had success, they believe. It's never been really studied before. But someone said, inmates have trauma. Why don't we try it with prisoners? So they reached out to us. We did a study in Richmond, Virginia. And guess what? This small intervention of storytelling has a significant effect in terms of reducing post-traumatic stress in inmates and increasing pro-social behavior at the same time. So another study that I don't have enough time to talk about. So Prison Fellowship, you've heard of them. Then Prison Fellowship International is the wing of Prison Fellowship that goes to other countries. And so we're now in the middle of several studies in South Africa and Colombia, South America. And we're studying something called the Prisoner's Journey, which is a faith-based program based on the book of Mark. And we're looking at several prisons in Colombia. Here you can see these two prisons. And then we're looking at prisons in South Africa, 6 of them all total. And I'm just going to give you some of the early findings. I've tried to keep all the statistics out of the presentation, but this is a model. Don't you think it's pretty? I do. So one of the things that we try to do is to figure how can these programs affect outcomes. And so participation in the program called the Prisoner's Journey is designed to transform inmates through introducing them to the Bible and to the possibility of a transformative relationship through Jesus Christ. So we measure religiosity, how often they participate in religious events, how often they pray, etc. And so you can see a model that we built. And then would that affect something called identity transformation? This is what we've been studying for the last 6 years. And our secular scholars believe in something called identity transformation, but up until recently, religion wasn't a part of that equation, and so we've plugged it in. And so what we find when we've studied this, I'll just skip to the model, we find evidence that every one of the relationships is significant. So these are a host of indirect relationships. The only one that we didn't find was the bottom one there between crystallization of discontent. And what does that mean? That means I'm tired of what I've been and I want to start a new path. And so you see the virtues, forgiveness, accountability, self-control. These are things that the Templeton Foundation is really interested in, and we've been studying them. And then a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So when you look at this, religiosity, the program affects religiosity, religiosity affects these other things, and then those affect what we call negative emotional states. A lot of prisoners commit suicide, and then there are violence in the prison. And so we didn't find that in South Africa. There's a long reason why that wasn't the case, that one indirect relationship at the bottom. But the big point of it all is that it's working in places like Africa and South America, and we're in conversations with Prison Fellowship International about new countries to bring into that orbit as well for research. I'll just skip through this real quick. This is just an article in Christianity Today. One of the things that we try to do beyond doing empirical studies, and there, articles published in journals that nobody reads. We know that, except for a few eggheads like ourselves. So we try to publish it in outlets that real people would read, like Christianity Today or op-eds in the Wall Street Journal and the like. I just threw this in here. Any of you might be interested in The Economist. It's a respected publication. This was a feature piece in The Economist from almost 4 years ago, looking at MS-13 gang members in El Salvador. MS-13, they're everywhere now. All urban areas are having to deal with this, but El Salvador is somewhat the hub, the home of this. And there has been this story that there has been revival in the jails of El Salvador, so much so that the economists went down there to investigate, and so did others. And what's happening is that churches have infiltrated these dark places, and it's the only way to get out of MS-13 alive, is to have some kind of a serious conversion experience, because if you try to get out of it, otherwise they'll kill you. But you have to be sincere. If you're not sincere, they'll kill you. So this is all very fascinating. We need to do research there, and so we've talked about it. We had a proposal. My wife said, you're not going to El Salvador to study MS-13. But I put it up there for a reason. It still needs to happen, and who knows, maybe that will still happen. This is our most recent book on the restorative prison that came out a few months back. And the last chapter is my favorite chapter, because in that chapter, we talk about what is it that society at large can learn from prisoners to help us flourish. I've been going into prisons for 30 years now, and there is a peace and a contentment in prisons among men that have found God, and women, that is contagious. And we've been there days and nights, weekends, and you see these people over time, and there is a joy that they have that really is quite remarkable. And there's something in there that I think that we can learn from them. And that's in the last chapter. So flourishing, at some level, that's what a lot of these inmates are doing. They're flourishing in spite of the fact that they know that they're never going to get out of prison. That led me to write about that, and I did. And I was asked to present those findings at a symposium at Harvard University in 2018, where 13 scholars from around the world came together to present a flourishing paper. So I presented the Angola story, and the host was Tyler Vanderwill at Harvard, and Tyler and I had become friends, and we talked after his presentation because he said, so much of what we know is correlational. It's not causal, it's correlational, and we should be doing causal studies. Well, causal studies are expensive to do, but they are something that we should be thinking more intentionally about doing. So during the break, I said to Tyler, why don't we hatch a plot to do a global longitudinal study to follow people over time around the world and get rid of the causation issue? And he goes, well, are you out of your mind? Do you know how much something like that, I don't even know if it's possible, and if it is possible, it would cost too much money. And the idea was, let's at least talk to the Gallup organization, because they have become friends over the years. We've done so much with Gallup. And so we pitched this idea to Gallup. Gallup said, give us a couple of months to see if it's even possible to do. And Gallup, let me go back. These are the partners. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. These are the partners. So it's Baylor, Harvard, Gallup, the Center for Open Science. Lisa Shaw from the Center for Open Science lives here in Malibu. It's based in Charlottesville, but it is 22, isn't it? So anyways, so I'm so glad that she's here. So these are the partners in our project. And so the idea of being a nationally representative study in multiple countries, looking at all religions, not just Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, people of no religion. So that was the idea, to see what helps people flourish and why is it that some people are not flourishing around the world. So that's the idea behind the Global Flourishing Study. We went to Gallup. They said, well, we created the World Poll. It took us a decade, but we created it. They spent well over $50 million in creating it, which allows them to survey over 150,000 people per year around the world in 160 plus nations. It's incredible. It's an technological marvel for sure, but it's cross-sectional, which means it doesn't get us beyond correlation, because every year it's a new 150,000 people. And so we hit Gallup with the proposition, could we do the same people over time? And so the answer was, we can. And so we have launched a project in the fall to collect nationally representative data in 22 countries around the world, representing about half of the world's population. It'll be the richest data set out there. It's really unprecedented in the social sciences. And the budget, you can see there's pretty popping, $43.5 million, and it's actually growing because of some things that have happened recently. These are the countries around the world that we will be following, offenders. So 240,000 people, about almost 250,000. Can you imagine trying to keep up? I know that people here want to keep up with your students after they graduate, and even that's hard, right? This is the U.S., but we're talking about some unusual countries here. In India, we have 11 languages that we are translating our survey into, and in going into some of the most remote villages. So it's a mammoth undertaking. I'm going to go fast now. Just the development of the instrument that we're using took us 18 months, and we had to have feedback from scholars all around the world. And when you ask for feedback from scholars, guess what you get? A lot of feedback. So we had to go through all of that, and we came up with an instrument that we are really proud of. These will be 20-minute interviews. And you're going, just 20 minutes? Well, there's fatigue that sets in, so you don't want to get people too exhausted because you want them to participate in the study over a 5-year period. So attrition is a real issue that we're concerned about. But these are some of the core areas that we're looking at when we're talking about flourishing. And we want to ask these, questions like this. You've heard this before. Is it that we know that people that go to church are happier than people that don't go to church. But is that because happy people go to church? Or does going to church make people happy? This is the problem with causal studies. It doesn't tell you correlational studies, but causal studies will answer those questions, and that's what we're really excited about doing. And so these are areas that you see that we'll be looking at in this project. The Center for Open Science, Lisa Shaw is here with us tonight, is going to be an enormous asset for this project because it is an open access data source. So this means everyone in the world, theoretically, will have access to this data as soon as we do. That really is kind of unprecedented, especially of a project of this magnitude. So we're really thrilled to have them as a partner. They will be managing the data and so much more. And then there is a huge marketing strategy for this. We just found out that Templeton wants to give us a significant second grant to do multiple documentary features on the making of the project over the next 5 years. So it's really a great time for us to celebrate something like that. There's tons of possibilities. I won't go into all of them. But new countries likely will come in. United Arab Emirates, Canada, Greece are just 3 recent countries that have been asking, how can we be a part of this study? So it will almost certainly increase. But of course, there'll be a price tag for bringing new countries on board, as you might expect. So this is just some websites that you can go to learn more about that. But I'm going to stop there and thank you for listening. And we're going to now have a discussion. Jay?
Wow, was that great? Just a wonderful presentation. Byron, I just want to express my gratitude to you for your partnership that we're already beginning to discuss. The scholarly application of those skill set that you defined to questions of faith and impact in the world in which we live is just exciting and just tremendous. I want to thank everyone who's here tonight. I want to thank you for being here. I want to make an announcement just about Pepperdine's partnership with Byron, Pepperdine's goal to integrate key components of this work to the scholarly life of Pepperdine University. And then after that announcement, we'll have some time to discuss that partnership, and we'll also have some time for any questions that you might have, so we welcome those. So tonight, Pepperdine announces the establishment of the Center for Faith and the Common Good that will be hosted here on our campus. The mission of this center will be to facilitate, through funding initiatives and faculty collaboration, scholarly work that seeks to assess structures and systems that serve the common good. Much of that you can feel, you can anticipate from what's been discussed tonight. Pepperdine will host this research-focused center through a partnership of Pepperdine Scholars working in collaboration with scholars from other institutions. The executive leadership of this center will be a partnership between Dr. Byron Johnson and President Gash. Their leadership will play a central role in casting a vision for this center and supporting efforts to secure additional funding for this institute. And I'm so glad tonight to announce that we already have $600,000 in funding available for the scholarship to be performed under this initiative. I won't talk about the target of our fundraising, but maybe President Gash will have some comments on that as we have our discussion. The academic director of this institute will be Vice Provost Dr. Lee Katz. Dr. Lee Katz is an experienced and exceptional scholar, a grant writer, a journal editor, and a very experienced and accomplished ecologist in the Santa Monica Mountains, just a tremendous member of our community. Dr. Katz has led institutional efforts already to provide support for scholarly work at all 5 schools of our institution, overseeing the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. Dr. Katz has already begun conversations with Pepperdine faculty to explore their potential interest in engaging in this center to pursue research questions regarding faith and the common good. Indeed, that expressed interest and support was critical, so that faculty expressed interest and support was critical in our decision to pursue the establishment of this center. This will be a hosting of these scholarly relationships with scholars across the country and the world, we hope. So I just want to express my sincere excitement tonight. This is a big moment for Pepperdine, an exciting moment. And I think good things will come from this center, good things that will have tangible impact upon our culture, on our society, and will strengthen the scholarly work of Pepperdine. But we anticipate robust societal impact that will emerge from the work of the Center for Faith and the Common Good. I want to now gather Dr. Johnson and President Gash together for a conversation about this new center in the front of the room, and we'll transition to some conversation. So thank you. I just want to let you know that there will be time for you to ask questions as well. So I apologize that we're going to have a bit of a conversation before you get to ask your questions, but we have some things to talk about. And I want to begin tonight by asking President Gash to jump in and offer a vision, his vision for this center, and perhaps Dr. Johnson will follow up with some comments of his own. President Gash?
Thanks, Jay, and thank you all for coming tonight. The vision for this center is to position Pepperdine in the middle, at the center, at the forefront of the study of the impact of faith on human flourishing, on societal impact, and on the common good. I remember being in Florence, Italy, I want to say, how long ago, maybe 8 years ago or so, 7 years ago, for one of these faith and learning seminars that faculty members get to go on with colleagues from other schools at Pepperdine. And I remember part of the assignment in advance of that was given by Dr. Cindy Miller-Perrin, really writing our vocational stories and about how the impact of our faith, the impact that our faith had on our careers. And then as I was thinking through, my kids have taken Dr. Elizabeth Mancuso's classes and her study of the intersection of psychology and faith, and then Dr. Christina Gibson of the business school, her studies on the impact of faith. and particularly in prisons. And I look across Pepperdine and I see so many believers, so many people who are trying to integrate their faithful academic, scholarly input or activities and show the impact. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity to take the 5 schools, bring them together around a common purpose, and have an impact on the world. And to have a colleague that I already knew who was deep into this work, world-renowned for this work, to be interested in being a partner with Pepperdine to help us launch this. And we'll talk about the first 3 studies of many to come that are already going to be, well, we've already got them funded, and we've got the researchers and now the collaborators. Students will be involved in this to bring students into the research of faculty members who are going to be working with faculty members and other researchers from around the country and around the world to go deep into these intersections, but then to also ensure that our law school's Religious Liberty Institute, newly founded clinic, that's going to be providing legal support. It's a partnership between the Jones Day law firm, the Beckett Fund, and Pepperdine University, really ensuring that we're providing legal support for people who are exercising their faith, and to be able to assist in some of the legal challenges that some prisons face with respect to the use of faith in prisons. And then our School of Public Policy. Fortunately for Pepperdine, Baylor doesn't have a School of Public Policy, but to be able to use the resources we have at our School of Public Policy in order to influence state and local legislators as they make decisions like Texas did and others have made. It's really a combination of the entire university around something that really matters to us, the faith and its impact on the world through excellent scholarship. And so that's the vision for this. Right now, we're mixing the ingredients for this concrete. We haven't poured the foundation. We're eager for the Pepperdine faculty to be involved in deciding what this looks like, but we know what the ingredients are, at least initially, to pour this foundation for. It's incredible research, and so I'm thrilled to be part of this. I am not someone who is qualified or has the time to be involved in this research, and so I will be a cheerleader, a fundraiser, and an advocate for this program. But as Jay said, Dr. Lee Katz will be the academic director of that. Byron?
Wow. I too have a real passion for this work, and talking to Jim and talking to Jay and Lee and others here, you have so many things that are so valuable, so many talented faculty members that we're actually going to be talking to over the next few weeks and months and strategizing about possibilities. I want to be a cheerleader too. I want to do whatever I can to help. It's important to me, and I just think Pepperdine is so positioned with your DC presence. That's so strategic. And I think there's so much that you can do as a university, and I want to help in any way that I can. I think there's going to be another announcement too in just a second that will make this a little bit clearer to you how I plan to do that. So I couldn't be more excited, and the support of the administration to be in this game is so important. Our world is struggling. Just watch the news. You don't have to look at Ukraine and Russia. You can just look on almost any urban center. We have major issues that need addressing, and we can't expect that the government will do it all. We can't expect people of faith to do it all, but you know what? People of faith can be a big part of it, and we can partner in ways that are strategic to help the world be a better place. How can we help people flourish? We want to do that. We don't apologize for it. It's a part of our DNA, and I just want to lend my hand to it, and I couldn't be more excited to be a part of what you're doing here.
The Sudro Global Justice Program will also be a partner in this as we bring global some of these studies, and Cameron McCollum, who's the director of that Sudro Global Justice Institute, will be the operations director working closely with Lee. Let me also announce that beginning on April 1st, Byron will have the title of Distinguished Visiting Professor of Religious Studies and the Common Good at our School of Public Policy. So he will be lending a lot of his time to Pepperdine as well. And yes, the answer is we are trying to get him to release his hold on Baylor. But give us a little bit of time. There's 9 grandkids that we've got to worry about relocating first.
Careful, this is live on Zoom. Linda is watching.
Sorry, Linda. President of Baylor.
Byron, I want to ask you a couple questions about research as it relates to social science. So you're doing some really remarkable work in assessing the impact of interventions on populations of prisoners. Just an incredible, in my mind, an incredibly complex undertaking. Could you talk a little bit about how you approach that work?
Yeah. Well, whenever we do a project, we have to get our institutional review board to sign off on it. That's kind of step one, get IRB approval. And then once you have IRB approval, then you start going to these agencies where you're going to be asking them for permission. So they want to know that you've actually passed some litmus test. And so a lot of these countries will eventually give us permission to come in. But when we get there, they won't let us into the prisons. And so so now what do we do? And there are just so many complications that you have to face on the fly when you're doing doing studies in countries around the world. There's always issues that arise that we have to go to Plan B or Plan C, but how do you do it with academic integrity? How do you do it with a view to making sure that it's of the utmost quality? We want everything we do to get published in peer-reviewed journals. If we can't do that, we don't even begin the process. So it is hard work. I have to say it's so rewarding because when you go in there and you observe these things, it has an effect on you. So it's challenging. If I could, every study would be a random clinical trial. We randomly assign people into one group and randomly assign them into another group. But you know what? We can't do that. It creates all kinds of issues, as you might expect, if it's a faith-based intervention. So what do? You come up with other methodologies that resemble an RCT, so quasi-experimental designs and the like. And how do you do the matching designs? And so it causes us to be on our A game to figure out what can you do in this environment, like Nigeria, which is a challenge for so many reasons, but also a country that's really important for us to understand, just like Uganda is. So there's always this where we're just being stretched as scholars to go to the next level. And because I think of our faith, we're just compelled to do whatever it takes to go the extra mile, to make sure that we can get it into the best outlets we possibly can, because we think that's a part of our calling.
Fantastic. I just sense a follow-up to this would be just, could you talk a bit about publishing? So I sense there might be some pushback at times when you add the word faith-based to these assessments. But at the same time, you have these, just extraordinary data sets. Could you talk a little bit about that challenge?
Yeah, I remember my mentor, David Larson, once said to me, because you get papers reviewed and you get these ridiculous reviews back. And he said, I've got a whole stack of FLRs. FLRs, funny-looking reviews. This is what you get when you do a study on religion. But that's just an additional challenge because so many of the reviewers come from a background of not just being a-religious, some of them are quite hostile. And I remember early on, I had a study that we did, and the findings are pretty compelling. I submitted it to the top journal. I got one positive review, one kind of positive review, somewhat mixed, and one horrible review. And the horrible review said, I sniff that there's something going on here, that there's bias. So how do you address a sniff? And so my mentor said to me, call the editor. I go, like the editor of the journal? He goes, yeah, just call him. I go, I can't do that. He goes, yeah, you can. You can call the editor. So I called the editor of the journal, and I said, I'm really frustrated. We did everything the reviewers asked, and it still got a rejection, even though we answered every criticism. And he said, can I be honest with you? He said, the person that's dead set against it is a heavyweight. And so we're just going to go with the heavyweight. And I said, this is where prayer helps. Just like that, I said, I have a great idea. Why don't you let this heavyweight respond in writing about the paper, publish it, and let them trash it, but let me have a rebuttal. And he goes, oh, I kind of like that idea. And I go, and can I tell you my rebuttal? So I outlined my rebuttal. And he goes, let me get back to you. So he called me back the next day. He's taken back all of his comments. We're going to publish it straight out. And so I called his bluff. And I actually showed that the bias almost certainly was in the opposite direction. So the findings were being presented about as conservatively as they could be. So I just think that this is where I think we need to do our homework and be willing to go the extra mile instead of just saying, it's a rejection and we toss it. And so, that too, now that a mentor taught me these kinds of things, that's a part of what I hope we can do here. How can we help scholars be much more effective in getting published? Because at the end of the day, we want them to be successful too.
What a great story. Wow. I love that. So this center is to be hosted by Pepperdine. So this is really something that will emerge from Pepperdine's community, and we're excited about that. And we're just beginning to cast a vision for that and are excited about faculty partnership in that. Can you comment a bit about how Pepperdine can host these collaborative efforts, the likelihood of attracting scholars from other institutions, just the heavy lift regarding building those collaborations?
You're in Malibu. I've recruited some heavyweights to Waco. I just feel like it's all about mission. When I was at the University of Pennsylvania and Baylor was recruiting me, I said, I'm flattered, but I really have no interest in coming. And they said, but listen to our mission. And they spelled out the mission, and then they said, would you just pray on that? What are you supposed to say? I said, sure, and I did, and I prayed on it, and I wanted to be a part of a mission and leave a secular Ivy school to do so. And I remember talking to people at Baylor, and they said, I don't know that you'll be able to recruit other people to come, but they did. And in fact, it's the only reason they would come, because of the mission. And I really feel like, unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer places that can say this now. And so I think Pepperdine is a light for the academy. I think Baylor is too. But you have so much promise here for the future, and you think so globally here. And I think we have to be thinking that way with your footprint around the world. And then your footprint in Washington, and the law school, the School of Public Policy, Pete Peterson. I mean, these are all huge assets that I can see just taking Pepperdine to the next level. And if I can coach a little bit, I'd love to be able to do that. And pass a blessing on. People have really mentored me and helped me and encouraged me. And I think that's a lot of what is missing in the academy, is that kind of collegiality and being willing to invest in each other. And when that happens, you don't need an army. That was another thing one of my mentors taught me, that God can change a field with a handful of people. And so if you look at medicine, David Larson, my mentor, when he first started doing studies on health and healing, the med schools across this country didn't really have any courses that were consistent with that. So now, like half the med schools have a course in spirituality and health, because there's thousands of studies making that powerful connection. And so it just took a few researchers here and there to investigate it, and then once they came out with these findings, other people wanted to know if they could replicate them. And of course, more studies and more studies. So I think that we need to dream big and see what God will do.
All right, my last question, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So we're going to have to talk about money, and you knew this was coming. So you've had great success in fundraising and supporting the research that we're talking about. Could you talk a little bit about the fundability of this kind of research? it's hard to imagine the National Institutes of Health funding this kind of research. What kind of funding agencies have you engaged with that have been supportive of this work?
I mean, I've had a good bit of money from the Department of Justice. We have a long way to go with our federal government because many people in the federal government just have a fear of faith because they don't understand it. And so we know that faith from so many studies that it's important. And one of the things that you and I and others have been talking about is the economic impact of faith. As soon as we can maybe help people understand more clearly that faith probably affects our national economy by over $1.2 trillion a year. Can you imagine a society without it? Where would we be without faith? Where would we be without houses of worship? It's a scary thought. So I think that agencies have been slow on the uptick. That's why we've had to rely, unfortunately, on private foundations. The good news is private foundations seem to work much quicker in the funding cycle and at more significant levels than the federal government. But it shouldn't be the case. The federal government should want to know if religion is effective and how we can be more effective in addressing social problems. It's like faith-based drug treatment programs, suicide prevention, homelessness. These are all issues that have huge economic impact on our society. So I do think that foundations will rally behind it. And I do think that individual donors, that if you just watch, you can see things crumbling and that they need to be addressed. So I think if we pitch it in the right way, that people will be willing to rally behind it and fund it. And then, of course, the best way to get funding is to produce scholarship. And then you can go back and say, look what this research shows, but we need to do more. We've only begun to scratch the surface. And so we need to continue to produce these kinds of studies, just like the Angola study. We don't want prisons to be overly punitive. We want them to see inmates as not problems to be monitored, but assets to be cultivated. The answer for our prisons is in the prisons themselves. And so I think how can we help the government to understand that? I think for us to be a part of that solution is important.
So as people are thinking about a question to ask, let me ask a follow-up on that with respect to the funding of the first three projects. And why don't you go ahead and tell us about those three projects?
Yeah. So Burl Cain, you may remember we mentioned him earlier as the warden at Angola, has become a believer in research, and because it completely validated the Angola experiment. And so he is sending Pepperdine money. Jim met with him in Dallas recently to fund these initial studies. And so one of them is going to be a replication of the Angola experiment at Parchman, which is the other prison in America that's also been known as the most violent, also built on a former plantation in Parchman, Mississippi. So we're going to see that project gets done. Does it work in Mississippi like it did in Louisiana? And then these prison seminaries are now popping up all over the country. So 29 states have launched a Bible college embedded within a prison, but we don't know what's going on with all of that. And that needs to be monitored to see if they are, in fact, using a different model or the same model. Is it working? Are there problems? So that would be a second study. And then a third study would be just to talk to correctional leaders all across the country to see what they think, what are their most important problems they're trying to address, and what, if any, do they see faith, that role playing in some of these solutions. And so these three studies, I think, will provide great intelligence for what kinds of things could come next, all of which is completely policy relevant.
What questions? Sean's got the microphone. Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Looks like Rick Gibson's got a question.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and a very exciting project. My question has to do with, using the word religion or faith. I noticed that in two of your slides, one you had a photo of a Catholic church, and then the Economist slide had Pentecostal faith. I'm wondering if you might explain or describe the spectrum of Christian faith, and then secondly, does this go beyond Christian faith? Does this go into faith more broadly?
Yes and yes. In Louisiana, when we studied that prison, those 29 different churches, Episcopalian, Catholic, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, Lutheran, just about the gambit. And so, we wanted to know how all of them worked and operated. One of the most fascinating things, some of these prisoners attended 4 or 5 different congregations. So on Monday night, I'm a Presbyterian, and on Tuesday night, I'm a Baptist. I go to Mass on Sunday. I mean, it was just like, are you kidding me? It is probably the most ecumenical environment that one has ever been in. But we do want to know what the difference is between these. And we do, like I've been asked many times, what about Islam in prisons? What about these guys that are converting to Islam? Are they getting rehabilitated? Are they less likely to be rearrested once they get out? You know what the answer is? We don't know. Because there hasn't been any scholarship on that. And so I have a Muslim colleague in Washington, D.C. that is right now trying to secure funding for a study of Islam in prison. It's an empirical question that we don't have an answer to, but we should. And so the Global Flourishing Study will be the first time that we will be able to look at these same measures, but with different religious traditions. It's very special. I will say this, one of the things that we find consistently in the literature, it's not so much if you're a Presbyterian or Church of Christ, but it's the level of commitment. How often do you practice your faith? How often do you study the Bible? How often do you pray? And what do you pray about? Those are critical variables that seem to trump denomination. We need more research on that too, but it's a great question. We want to do all of it.
Thanks, Rick. Others? Yes, Heidi.
I was just wondering if you've done any studies specific to worship and music underneath your umbrella.
Once we did the press conference on the release of the Global Flourishing Study, I got an email from the School of Music saying, can we have a conversation? So I invited them over for lunch, which is what we do all the time. It's a Baptist institution. You have to have meal at everything, right? So these professors were saying, and they did it in the most humble way, are you looking at music? And I said, we're not. It's a 20-minute interview. We had to cut like 80 questions. And they go, we feel like music helps people flourish. And different kinds of music in different areas help people to flourish. And we totally get it. We think that they're right. And there'd be people that would say it's not just music, it's the arts that help people flourish. So one of the things that we're now doing is going to meet with the music faculty on a regular basis to see what possibilities there might be for spin-offs, one-off studies, where we do actually look at the contribution that music and worship together play in helping people to flourish. This is a blind spot that we have. And so thank you for asking the question. You nailed us. We need to address it.
I think we got time for another question or two right here.
Thank you for an inspiring evening. I think we're going to leave just high after this. I'm curious about how you got from correctional institutions and that to human flourishing as a society. Now, or am I going too far with that?
You're spot on.
What's the connection? How is that? Describe that continuum for us. Please.
One of the things that has happened, most academics know an awful lot about a little bit. And so we're experts in one little area. And but what's happened in my journey has been that these other projects will come along, and my mentor would say, you need to do this. I said, I'm not qualified to do that. He said, oh, yes, you are. So the next thing I know, I'm studying a topic that I don't even know. I have to go out and read a new literature to understand this topic. And that's been happening for more than 2 decades. And so when someone approached me about doing a study on homelessness, I said, I have not read any of the literature on homelessness. So I had to go read the HUD literature to get up to speed. And so it's been a constant learning curve, but all I've ever tried to do is just to pray on something, and if I can, say yes. And so now here I am leading a project that's going to be about $50 million on human flourishing. Are you kidding me? But, it's one of those things where you try to surround yourself with the best talent you possibly can, always getting people that are much better than you are to work with you. That's been a key through all of it. And so in my journey, it's been, instead of a narrow dive, it's been widening and widening. And so it's exciting. I love it. So now we've done studies on, drug abuse, domestic violence, all kinds of things, and educational studies as well. The Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts. I'm an expert on the Eagle Scouts. And so people have the mistaken idea that if you do this, you can do that. And so I've benefited from that over the years. But, again, it's a God thing.
Well, let me ask the final question. And you've alluded to this. You've talked about various other things that could be studied. We at Pepperdine, as we've talked about, are kind of really in the front edge, the envisioning stage of this. We're going to be studying prisons and the impact on prisoners. What are some of the other things that you could envision us studying the impact of Christian faith on X? You mentioned suicide. You mentioned mental health. What are some of the other things that could be studied in a way that isn't just, well, that's a good anecdote, or that's what people think, like with real data to demonstrate the causal connection?
Yeah. Well, you and I were talking about this, I think, yesterday or the day before. You've heard the expression depths of despair. Well, there's a new term. It's called deaths of despair. And this is the dramatic rise in suicides and drug and alcohol deaths over the last 30 years. It's unbelievable. And no one knows what to do about it. And it's just continuing. The trajectory is so disturbing. I think that based on what we know now, faith is a protective factor for all those deaths of despair. But what are we doing to help congregations? I mean, one of the things that I could imagine happening is not only helping people on Capitol Hill know what some of the most effective remedies are, but what if we could communicate more clearly to congregations? How can we help congregations that are, suffering with problems that people in the real world have? When I was raised, if you had problems, you just kept it quiet. But we need support groups, and we're doing better, but we can do so much better. And I think if there's a way in which we can do academic speak, but we can also translate it into ways that people will get in the pews and be a service to congregations all across, I think that would be wonderful right there. But there's just so many topics. We mentioned foster care and adoption. What a great ministry that is for so many to do, but people need support for those things. And then, again, going back to the arts, we're going to be doing a major documentary on the Global Flourishing Study with multiple episodes. I don't even know how we're going to do that, but we're going to go to the best we can get to do the documentary. But how can we translate this into video so that more people will have access to these remarkable efforts that take place in communities all across the country? That's the other thing I'd say, Jim, and maybe closing, is that there are so many faith-based groups that are small and doing great work, and no one knows about them. Retired people that are flying to places like Africa to minister. Most of all these ministries that I've been studying, they're all led by volunteers. we know very little about these people, except that they're incredibly generous with their time and their talents, and it's having an effect. So the more that we can tell this story far and wide, the better society will be, and I just think that so resonates with your mission here.
Let me say one last thing, and I'll give Jay the last word. One of the things that you said that struck me, that you've said to me before, you said tonight, you said, when something comes up, I just pray about it and let God lead. And we're just so grateful that after you prayed about it, you let God lead you to this. So thank you, Byron.
I'll just parrot that and say thank you so much for being here tonight, for your words. And I hope all of you have received a message tonight of encouragement, a message of the impact of faith upon the lives of those around us. I just think this is a compelling story of caring for those that need our attention. And I hope you've heard that tonight. So thank you so much for being here. Let's offer a round of applause for Dr. Johnson. I would invite you up if you'd like to talk with Dr. Johnson or President Gash or myself. We would welcome that. Thank you.